Hey YouTube, this is Eric. I'm on a new laptop right now, so hopefully my volume is good. But I'm just going to be sharing just some research I've been doing recently. I was looking at the board of directors for the American Council for an International Promotion of Democracy Under God. The mouthful, but that was the Pro-Dio subsidiary that was created in the United States that had like Knights of Malta, J. Peter Grace on the board, Henry Luce, Skull and Bonesman, who ran Time Magazine, was on the board. I've covered in previous videos I've done on Pro-Dio, C.D. Jackson, Eisenhower's chief specialist of psychological warfare. C.D. Jackson bought the Zapruder film after the Kennedy assassination and altered the Zapruder film to make sure that the truth never came out on that. C.D. Jackson was known commonly as the CIA's inside man at Time Magazine, but he was on the board. And C.D. Jackson was very close with Joseph Rettinger. A source for that is in Kai Bird's book, The Chairman. And also I have Rettinger's memoirs, and Rettinger writes about meeting C.D. Jackson and how much he likes him. But when Rettinger toured America in the 50s, he saw C.D. Jackson. He was one of the first people who Rettinger saw, and Jackson became the head of the Bilderberg wing. And in my library, I put together a document with a pamphlet that Pro-Dio released and declassified letters that C.D. Jackson sent to Henry Luce on the subject of Pro-Dio. But I was looking at the names just on the American Council for an International Promotion of Democracy Under God, the Pro-Dio subsidiary. I was looking at the names just on the boards of directors, and this one name just really caught my attention. His name was Frank Folsom. Let me see your screen share. Okay. This is the guy here that caught my attention. I'll show you a picture of him first. His Wikipedia is very small. But here it is here, Frank M. Folsom. Here's a photo of him here. You see this, just a quick intro. I'm going to read you his full wiki and other information. You see Frank Marion Folsom was an electronics company executive and was a permanent representative to the Holy See. He was a permanent representative. And he was actually, you'll see, he was the representative from the Holy See to the International Atomic Energy Commission, which coincidentally has a Roman laurel wreath right on the logo, just like the Interpol, International Police Organization, has a Roman wreath on its logo, and the United Nations has a laurel wreath on its logo. And the Organization of American States has a laurel wreath on its logo. Here's a photo of Frank M. Folsom. I'm going to show you. I found a photo of, he's mentioned in Teddy Hesburroughs, who is a Catholic priest of the the Congregation of the Holy Cross Society. But I saw a picture of Hesburrow with Frank Folsom with Pius XII, which I'll show you. But here's a photo of him here, Frank M. Folsom. And I'll show you his name on the board of directors. So here's a page here for the American Council for an International Promotion of Democracy Under God. You see here, board of directors. Here's Frank Folsom's name. Right underneath the Knight of Malta, James A. Farley's name. James A. Farley was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee from 1932 to 1936, then became the Postmaster General of the United States, and then became the global chairman of Coca-Cola International. And there's lots of good information on James Farley's activities at Coke and a book I put on my library. It's called For God, Country, and Coca-Cola. It's an 800-page book on the history of Coke. You see, James Farley and Coke were very friendly to the South American dictators like Somoza, Castillo Armas. Very close with Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. But you see, here's the name here. I'll highlight it so you can see it. Frank M. Folsom is on the board of directors at this Pro-Dio subsidiary, the American Council for the International Promotion of Democracy Under God. I showed you a document in the last video I did, but I'll show you another document. I'll show you in their own documentation. Pro-Dio was laundering billions of dollars into South America through the Inter-American Bank, which is coincidentally, and the Inter-American Bank was the bank that was created. It's a bank created by the Organization of American States, which is essentially a separate United Nations for South America, and the United States is included in the Organization of American States. But there's the name Frank M. Folsom. Okay, so there's a photo of him. I'll pull up one more close up. Okay. Okay, there's Margaret Truman with Frank M. Folsom. Margaret Truman, is that related to Harry Truman? That wouldn't surprise me. I'll check that. Margaret Truman here is signing a contract to make a recording February 1st, 1950 with Frank M. Folsom. I'm sure Frank M. Folsom was more than just a papal chamberlain. He was a Knight of Malta and like a Knight of the Order Sepulchre and many others. There's let me see, Margaret Truman. And you know, I've covered Harry Truman. You can see the video of him speaking at Jesuit Fordham University. I don't know if she was buried at the Harry Truman Library. Yeah, she was the first lady. Oh no, sorry. Only child of President Harry Truman. I apologize. She was the child of First Lady Bess Truman. So Harry Truman's kid, or daughter, Margaret Truman, is seen here in a photo with Frank Folsom. So he's very intriguing. Okay, and I haven't heard his name before. I haven't seen him like written in many, anti-Vatican books. So he's stayed in the shadows for the most part. But here's his Wikipedia page. Oh, actually, I gotta go back here. Okay, this here, Frank Folsom. See, he was an electronics company executive and a permanent representative to the Holy See. He graduated from Catholic Manhattan College, which is a Roman Catholic liberal arts school in the Bronx. Then Folsom graduated from Jesuit Fordham University. Okay, and then he graduated from Jesuit University of San Francisco. Okay, so you see from his education alone, he's very plugged in. Folsom began his career in 1910 at the Montgomery Ward Company in the merchandising field. He held the position of manager of West Coast operations and marketing vice president. From 1940 to 1941, Folsom worked for the department store Goldblatt Brothers in Chicago, Illinois. Interestingly, Chicago, like the city where the Archbishop James Edward Quigley in 1903, James Edward Quigley, Archbishop of Chicago, said that the United States and the Catholic Church will rule the world. And he says, and James Edward Quigley said, when the United States rules the world, the Catholic Church will rule the world. And then the Archbishop James Edward Quigley also threatened. He said, I'd like to see a politician run against the church in Chicago. His brain would be very short indeed, from his own words. I have the Tribune story from 1903 on my library. You can see that. But Folsom was stationed in Chicago. And he was an assistant coordinator for purchases for OPM from 1941 to 1942. In 1942, he was appointed as special assistant to the Undersecretary of the Navy. Would you look at that? It was here where he met David Sarnoff, who got him his next job as executive vice president of the RCA Victor Division. Folsom was then promoted to its president at RCA, and RCA is the Radio Corporation of America, which started off as a subsidiary of General Electric. But RCA, you should read the RCA Wikipedia page. It was at one point the biggest television company in America, and Folsom played a key role in expanding television into the mass consciousness. But RCA was recently reacquired by General Electric, like in 1986. And just currently, the current chairman of General Electric, Jim Flannery, is a devout Roman Catholic who went to Jesuit Fairfield Prep. Yeah, and actually, I've done a video down on my feed. General Electric, I think in 2017, dished out. I want to say like 700,000 plus. I covered on my channel. Actually, more than that. They did. I probably covered at least 10 million. I want to say, or not. Maybe 10 million is a lot. I would say at least $2 million in the video I covered that they dished out to Catholic institutions and Jesuit schools. That being General Electric in 2017. But continuing here. He was promoted president of RCA, Radio Corporation of America, Frank Folsom, in 1949, and served as chairman of the executive committee board until 1957. Folsom also served as a director of the Coca-Cola Bottling Company. This is when James A. Farley, Knight of Malta, who sat on the board of directors at the American Council for an International Promotion of Democracy, the Prodeo subsidiary, with Frank Folsom. Their names are right on top of each other on the list. So it's through the Knight of Malta, Frank Farley, I think no doubt gave Folsom his high-level director job at Coke. And then Folsom also worked for the John McGuire Company. He became a director at NBC You see, I mentioned Radio Corporation of America was very connected to NBC. They created NBC. So Folsom, being the chairman of NBC, or Radio Corporation of America, it makes sense he became a director at NBC. And then Folsom was also a director of the General Cable Corporation, RCA Commons, and Crown Cork and Seal. He was also a director at Tishman International. And you see, Folsom served as the representative of the Holy See to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And look at that Roman laurel wreath right there. So the logo tells you it's controlled by Rome already, and then you should realize that like guys like Papal Chamberlains and Knights of Malta, Frank Folsom, who's actually, you can see, I saw it in there's the Frank Folsom papers at Notre Dame, and I was looking at the list of his papers, and like it looked like he was close with Francisco Franco, the totalitarian dictator in Spain. Like Folsom went to see Franco quite a bit. You can't see like what's actually written in the correspondence, but you can see like correspondence with Franco and like box 21. You see, he was the Holy See's representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And Folsom was also a member of the Augusta National Golf Club, where the Masters takes place every single year. Interesting. He was on the Blind Brook Club of Portchester. He was in the Bohemian Club in the Jesuit fortress of San Francisco. Bohemian Club, you know, the Bohemian Grove. The Bohemian Club is very elitist. You can see some of the members, like William Randolph Hearst was a Bohemian Club member. Papal Count William Randolph Hearst. Richard Nixon was a Bohemian Club member. Bill Clinton was a Bohemian Club member. It's an elite club. You know, industrialists, businessmen, bankers, they're all in it. Okay. He was a member of the Everglades Club in Florida, which is the most preeminent, most exclusive social club in Palm Beach. Frank Folsom was also an Order of the Holy Sepulchre. Wikipedia lists that. He was in the Pilgrims of the United States, which was a British American society founded in 1902. And he was also in the Catholic Fraternity in Austria, KOHV Appeland. So even from his Wikipedia, you see he's very intriguing. And again, here's more photos of him. I mean, you see him, like, there's a photo of him, Harry Truman's daughter signing a recording contract with him. In 1950, 2 years later, Truman would attempt to appoint an official ambassador to the Vatican, that being Knight of Malta General Mark Clark, but it was shot down. Harry Truman gave a Medal of Honor to a Jesuit priest, Joseph O'Callaghan. He had a Jesuit trained Matthew Connolly as his Truman had a Jesuit trained at Fordham personal advisor. And he actually mentions that in the speech he did at Fordham. I'd like to shout out Connolly and my administration for being such a good personal advisor. And Connolly went to Fordham. I sourced that in the blog write-up I did on Truman. Here's another photo of Folsom here. And I found the New York Times. I'm just going to show you some of the sources I found on this guy. New York Times did an article on him. Then I'm going to cover just some of the evidence I found of money being laundered through the Prodeo network, which Folsom was a part of. You see here, Frank Folsom, this was his obituary in New York Times, 1970, January 14th. Frank Folsom, former president of the Radio Corporation of America, an aggressive merchandiser whose bold selling concepts played a major part in the commercial expansion of television, died Monday night after a brief illness. Mr. Folsom, who lived at 480 Park Avenue, was at home of a daughter, Miss Edward L. Leslie, in Scarsdale. Folsom was 75 years old. During his presidency of the Radio Corporation of America from 1949 to 1957, gross income of the corporatic rose from $379.2 million to $1.2 billion a year. That tells you how his Roman Catholic connections are making plays. And actually, no doubt, the guy who took over the Hearst Empire right around this time, Richard E. Berlin was his name. He took over the Hearst Empire, I think, in 1946. And Richard E. Berlin was a devout Roman Catholic and a Knight of Malta. And Richard E. Berlin, actually, in the book Hearst Over Hollywood, had a collection of, like Hearst, he had a collection of paintings that belonged to Holocaust victims that were slaughtered in Auschwitz. Berlin was also very close with Charles Coughlin, the radical fascist Catholic priest who was preaching the end of democracy in the United States. Okay, but you see here, so Folsom was he was increasing the sale, like the annual sales or the income of RCA $1 billion a year while he was chairman. The rise was attributed in large measure to Mr. Folsom's application of his merchandising skills to the sales of television sets. I think it has more to do with how in deep he was with the Catholics, but we'll keep reading. In addition to his business interests, he was a director of several corporations. Mr. Folsom was one of the nation's leading Roman Catholic laymen and served as a permanent representative of the Holy See to the International Atomic Energy Agency at Geneva. During World War II, he served as chief Navy procurement in Washington. And actually, you know what that is? That the Navy procurement, that is like that's allocating like the naval's like arms budget. And actually, in like the Navy, like you can read articles like Adolf Hitler's nephew, William Hitler, became employed by the United States Navy. Yeah, like I mentioned, the Jesuit priest Truman, or the Jesuit priest Joseph O'Callahan, who Truman gave a Medal of Honor to, was the chaplain to the United States Navy while William Hitler became employed there. Yeah. Let me just continue here. The descendant of a pioneer, Francis Marion Folsom was born May 14th, 1894 in Sprague, Washington, the son of Edward Presley and Anne Maria Wilson Folsom. He was a direct descendant of Edward P. Folsom, who settled in Hingham, Massachusetts in 1638. Folsom attended schools in Washington and Oregon, but never received a diploma. At the age of 16, he got a job as an elevator operator in the Lippman Wolf department store in Portland and soon became sales clerk. 3 years later, he was employed as an apprentice buyer at Hales Brothers in San Francisco. Well, I guess the New York Times article doesn't mention him being educated at Roman Catholic Manhattan College, Jesuit Fordham University, and Jesuit University of San Francisco. But continuing, so he became an apprentice buyer at Hales Brothers in San Francisco while probably he was attending the University of San Francisco. In 1917, when he was in the employee of the Weinstock and Lubin in Sacramento, he joined the aviation section of the Army Signal Corps. So he joined the U.S. Army too, the Black Pope's Army. Mr. Folsom joined Montgomery Ward & Co. in 1932 as a manager of Pacific Coast operations for mail and order and retail stores. The next year, he became vice president in charge of merchandising and a director. Mr. Folsom's chief duty in Chicago was to compile the yes, he's talking about in Montgomery Ward & Co. Okay, Mr. Folsom's chief duty in Chicago was to compile the company's massive mail order catalog. He and Donald M. Nelson, who is one of the founders of Sears, which is a department store still in existence to this day. Folsom and Donald M. Nelson, who designed the rival Sears Roebuck Co. catalog, became close friends. Look at this. This is fascinating here. Because like I covered on a previous video, General Joseph Francis Carroll, who is trained by the Jesuits at Loyola Chicago and was become a Catholic priest, was the first deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. In the 40s, Carroll, while working with the FBI as Hoover's special assistant, was the chairman of the War Assets Board, which like allocated at the end of the war how the military spending would be done. And before Nelson became the chairman of the War Production Board, I think it was William Nunson, the General Motors executive, who actually said to a reporter coming back from Nazi Germany that Nazi Germany was, quote, the miracle of the 20th century, end quote. But William Nunson, spelled Knudsen, he was the chairman of the War Production Board and was a high up at General Motors and was in the American Liberty League, which had the devout Catholic Papal Chamberlain, Knight of Columbus, Knight of Malta, Alfred E. Smith as the chairman of the Liberty League. Yeah. You see here when Mr. Nelson, Donald M. Nelson, became chairman of the War Production Board after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which was led by the Catholic Japanese Admiral Yamamoto. Mr. Nelson called on Mr. Folsom to serve as his deputy for procurement. Later, Mr. Folsom was put in charge by procurement for the Navy. He was awarded the Medal of Merit by President Harry Truman. Mr. Folsom joined the Radio Corporation of America in 1944 as vice president in charge of the Victor Division and a company director. A former colleague recalled yesterday that, quote, in the practical appraising way of the super merchandiser, he looked around the Victor plant at Canham, New Jersey for something he could sell, end quote. The television sets pushed is the headline. Underneath it, the something Mr. Folsom fastened on was television. He believed success in telling the sets. He believed success in telling the sets would carry along RCA's whole line. Television was a new industry in the making. Sets were prohibitively expensive to manufacture. Few persons could afford to buy them. There was only a handful of experimental TV stations in the country. When the end of the war made the reassumption of public telecasting possible, Mr. Folsom invited 100 actual and potential competitors to a meeting in Philadelphia. Because as Pierre Dupont said, it's good to be friendly with the competition. Folsom handed them blueprints for RCA's production and promotion plans for moderately priced TV sets and told them that RCA was willing to gamble, quote, several millions of dollars on television's future. Some of the designs had been industry secrets, as were the production lines Mr. Folsom showed his guests on a tour plant at Camden. He's continuing down here. Rallied whole industry. Mr. Folsom, described by friends as a, quote, a plain-speaking extrovert, told his guests that winning public acceptance of television was a job for an industry, not just a single company, and that he looked forward to strong competition to inspire aggressive selling at RCA. RCA, Radio Corporation of America, gave Mr. Folsom at the beginning an operational budget of $25 million a year for the promotion of television sales, but by 1948 the figure had more than doubled. So that's $50 million a year for his propaganda expenses. Among merchandising innovations introduced by Mr. Folsom was the contact system of servicing television receivers. Mr. Folsom became president of RCA in 1949 on recommendation of Brigadier General David Sarnoff, the board chairman. So the chairman of the board at the time, David Sarnoff, made Folsom the president of RCA. Folsom moved up to chairman of the board's executive committee in 1957, retiring in 1966. At his death, he was an RCA director and a consultant. Folsom was a director of several RCA subsidiaries. He reminds me of Nicholas Frederick Brady in a sense of like how connected he was to the corporate sphere. Folsom was director of several RCA subsidiaries, including National Broadcasting Company, several other corporations, including Coca-Cola Bottling Company of New York, Tishman Realty Construction Company, and Hialeah Days Courts. The University of Notre Dame was one of the 9 universities and colleges that conferred honorary degrees on Mr. Folsom. I bet there's at least 5 Jesuit schools that gave him honorary degrees, at least. But in 1952, RCA established a Frank M. Folsom Scholarship at Notre Dame. I'm just going to highlight that. Okay, another key scholarship program, the Lockheed Martin has a scholarship program now at Jesuit Santa Clara University. I'm going to see if anyone's in the chat. Hey, how's it going, Jeremiah? How's my volume? Can you hear me good? I'm just on a new laptop right now. Oh, absolutely. Like Trump, it wouldn't surprise me if Trump's a Bohemian Club member like this Frank Folsom. I know another powerful Bohemian Club member from back at that time was the chairman of the president of the American Legion, or the national commander, Frank N. Belgrano, who is the Knight of Malta, A.P. Giannini's like personal right-hand man, who took over Transamerica Corporation when Giannini died. And Frank N. Belgrano was a member of the Bohemian Club. And I saw documents that Frank N. Belgrano was calling for a national draft. He wanted to like force all American males to join the military, probably just to go out to Vietnam or Angola to get slaughtered. That was probably his MO. And there's now like a Boy Scouts award on given out in the honor of Frank N. Belgrano. Sounds good? Okay, perfect. So look at this here. So this is getting into Folsom's papal connection. So this is from the New York Times. It says Mr. Folsom was a papal chamberlain of the Cape and Sword. He was a Knight of the Grand Cross of the Knight of the Sovereign Order of Malta. Folsom was a trustee of the Catholic Charities of New York and the Catholic Relief Services, which were instrumental in the Inquisition against the Buddhists in Vietnam. They made sure that all the relief money that went into Vietnam, that none of it went to Buddhists, all of it went to Catholics. Folsom was also a trustee of the National Jewish Hospital at Denver. In March 1968, Pope Paul VI appointed Mr. Folsom an honorary consultor to the state of the Vatican City, the only American so honored. So you had like a lay American here, businessman, Frank Folsom, papal chamberlain and papal knight, though, who became an honorary consultor to the state of the Vatican. Survivors to Mr. Folsom include Miss Leslie and 2 other daughters, Mrs. William H. Cook and Mrs. Robert M. McCrae, a sister, Mrs. A.G. Stibful, 25 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren. Mr. Folsom's wife, the former Gladys Mabel Jordan, died in 1956, and there will be a pontifical requiem mass celebrated at 10 a.m. Friday by Terence Cardinal Cook, St. Patrick's Cathedral, right across the street from the Rockefeller Center. Interment will be in the gate of the Heaven Cemetery, Hawthorne, New York. As you just speaking quick on the Rockefeller, I'm going to probably cover this in the next video, but if you're not aware, Nelson Rockefeller was like kind of coached into politics by this guy here, Malcolm Wilson. And Malcolm Wilson, interestingly, his name, Malcolm Wilson, pops up on the American Council for International Promotion of Decency Under God at the very bottom, right beneath Paul Felix Warburg, Papal Court Jew. See Malcolm Wilson right there. And there's Frank Folsom here, J. Peter Grace, C.D. Jackson. Interesting, if you know Eric Johnston, you see this name right here? He was the chairman of the Motion Pictures Association of America. This is a powerful group here. Henry Luce, the chairman of Time Life. Okay. George DeLuca, another governor of New York. We see Malcolm Wilson was a governor and lieutenant governor of New York, and he was lieutenant governor on the ticket with Nelson Rockefeller. Okay, but look at this here. Wilson was born into a Roman Catholic family of Irish and Scottish extraction. He had 3 siblings. You see here, going down to education, he went to Fordham Prep, Jesuit. Then he got a bachelor's degree from Fordham, Jesuit. And then he got another degree from Fordham, Jesuit. Okay. And you see, look at this, Rockefeller's right-hand man. In 1958, Wilson decided to support Rockefeller for governor despite the fact that the latter was a political novice. I repeat, Jesuit-trained Malcolm Wilson decided to support Nelson Rockefeller, who I covered in the last videos, was attending the dinner put on by the Jesuit priest Augustin Bay, S.J., at the Dinner of the 9 Arrows at the United Nations that hosted the Secretary General Hugh Thant and Governor Nelson Rockefeller, Father Felix Morlean, and a whole bunch of other rascals. But you see, Rockefeller was a novice, okay, when Wilson decided to support Rockefeller, okay, and Rockefeller had never run for office before. Malcolm Wilson took pains to introduce Rockefeller to many powerful political people in the state. They would frequently travel in Wilson's personal car in order to play down the candidate's wealth. Look at that. The Rockefeller-Wilson ticket defeated the incumbent Averell Harriman, Skull and Bonesman, who set up the first commercial bank in Soviet Russia. After Wilson's election as lieutenant governor, he would go on to serve in that position for nearly 15 years. The Rockefeller-Wilson ticket was elected 3 times in 1962, 1966, and 1970. Yeah, throughout his tenure, he tended to agree with Rockefeller's liberal republicanism, with the notable exception of abortion. And guys, the key with South America, here's a great book. Where's my mouse? This is a book called Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. This book has it's almost 1,000 pages. Like hundreds of documents. You see, like Nelson Rockefeller was absolutely key in the colonization of South America, turning it into a corporate slave state, destroying hundreds of thousands of acres of Amazon's rainforest, installing over 15 military dictatorships. Nelson Rockefeller was very key in that, and also Adolf Burl was Adolf Burl was good friends with Nelson Rockefeller. Adolf Burl was Undersecretary of State in Roosevelt's administration, became the ambassador to Brazil. Burl became, here's his name here. I'll show you here. Adolf Burl is his name. He became the ambassador right here. Adolf Burl became ambassador to Brazil in 1942. And you should read this book here. It's a great book. But you see, Rockefeller was intimately connected with the Jesuits. Okay. You see, Adolf Burl was very connected with Pro Dio, and I found this in a source here by an article done by a lady called Anna Brady, who was a spokesman for Pro Dio. You know, Brady, the name of Nicholas Frederick Brady. But I found out that Adolf Burl Jr. was a sponsor of Pro-DO. Look at this. In preparation and presentation of this material, such notable authorities as Mr. Paul Anderson, Honorable Adolf Burl Jr., Sir Bernard Pears, who are non-Catholics, and M. Jacques Martin, Miss Helen Awolski, and Father Wilfred Parsons, S.J., have participated in Pro-DO activities. So Burl was connected with Pro-DO the whole time he was colonizing Latin America for the big American corporations. And this book, has hundreds of pages documenting Burl's role in the massacres in South America. Interestingly, I put in the memoirs of Joseph Rettinger, the Jesuit who created the Bilderberg Society, he writes about meeting Adolf Burl in 1942. So it all connects. It all connects. Okay, but just going back here to Frank M. Folsom. Here's a story I found here from the Catholic Monitor, January 1959. Okay, it says Frank Folsom named to NCCS board. Okay, it says Frank M. Folsom of the New York, widely known industrialist, has been appointed chairman of the Executive Committee on the National Catholic Community Service, a member agency of the USO. And the USO is the United Services Organization, which is supposed to be secular. Okay, Wikipedia that, United Services Organization. So you have the Catholic Community Service as a member agency of the secular United Services Organization. Folsom was named to succeed Michael T. Kellier of Boston, who had died in October. He had been a member of the NCCS committee since 1953. And that being Folsom has taken a leading role in the worldwide activities of the agency. I repeat, Folsom has taken a leading role in the worldwide activities of the agency on behalf of the nation's military personnel. Folsom is a vice president of the United Services Organization. I repeat, Folsom is a vice president of the United Services Organization, a member of the USO National Council, and also a member by appointment by President Eisenhower of the USO Corporation. Eisenhower promoted Folsom to the USO Corporation. So like this guy was like a Men in Black. Like a good analogy for it. He was just remaining in the shadows, controlling the invisible government of the U.S. Okay, Folsom is a former president of the Radio Corporation of America. He has been associated with RCA since 1944 and is now chairman of the executive committee of the RCA board of directors. Okay. Here's another interesting story I found with Folsom. This was done by the Catholic Advocate. He says Folsom receives Latier Medal. This is from 1958 in New York. The University of Notre Dame, and they gave an honorary degree to Folsom. I'm going to tell you, Folsom was very close with the president of Notre Dame, Theodore Hesborough. You see his name right here. But University of Notre Dame's 1958 Latier Medal was presented here to industrialist Frank M. Folsom by Cardinal Spellman. Cardinal Spellman, trained at Fordham, like Folsom. And Spellman, you can see photos in the book, The American Pope, of Cardinal Spellman smiling, like grinning, like ear to ear, beside the dictator Antonio Somoza in Nicaragua. Spellman went to see the dictator in Paraguay, Alfredo Stroessner. You can see photos of Spellman with the dictator in South Vietnam, Ngo Diem. Spellman was very psychotic and violent. Like this, look at his Jesuitical character assassination of Eleanor Roosevelt, just for one. Like the guy was a complete scumbag. The more I've looked into him, he was also he was widely it's come out that he was a homosexual too as well. But like you see Spellman was like Peter J. Doiswick in his book Catholic Victory in 1960 said that our American politicians cowardly bow to Cardinal Spellman. Cardinal Spellman was instrumental in drafting the Marshall Plan. The Secretary of State George Marshall was meeting with Cardinal Spellman to talk for hours on the subject of the Marshall Plan. And what I just mentioned, the Pro-DO member Adolf Burl, who's instrumental in launching all these coups in South America, starting by taking out Vargas in Brazil in 1942. Burl essentially, if you read that book I just sourced, That Will Be Done, Burl wanted to create a Latin American Monroe Doctrine, because the Monroe Doctrine was applied to Europe. And Spellman was instrumental in the creation of the Monroe Doctrine, just by being how close he was to Secretary of State Monroe. But this all connects. And you can make 1,000 different connections with Cardinal Spellman. Cardinal Spellman actually, like in the Covert Action Information Bulletin, they quote a Romanian paper that says that Cardinal Spellman is Pro-Dio's intelligence agent. It's a worldwide agency, but in terms of the Americas, they say Spellman is the head of Pro-Dio. And I've done this. I've showed this document in previous videos, but like if you read the declassified documents from C.D. Jackson to Henry Luce on the subject of Pro-Dio from 1957, you'll see that Moylan said that he had a guy who, quote, did the work for Fordham in receiving millions of dollars from the fundraiser John Price Jones. But who did the work, quote, who, quote, did the work for Fordham? I think that's Cardinal Spellman. Okay, so Spellman was all over the place. Okay, but you see, Spellman gave industrialist Frank M. Moylan, he presented Moylan the Latreille Medal in 1958. Reverend Theodore Hesborough, president of Notre Dame University, read the accompanying award, read the citation accompanying the award, which the university has presented annually since 1983 to an outstanding American Catholic layman. Folsom, former president of the Radio Corporation of America, as chairman of his executive committee, he and Father Hesborough are serving together as permanent representatives of the Vatican City to the International Atomic Energy Committee. Interesting, Frank Folsom, I found his name, he came up again. John F. Kennedy named the National Committee of Business and Professional Men and Women in 1963, or 19, what year is this? 1960. Yeah, 1960, Kennedy created this council. You see Frank M. Folsom's name comes up. There's another story I wanted to read here. Okay, here's this story here. I just found a few interesting media clips. This is from the Pharaoh's Tribune and Press from Logansport, Indiana, 1968. Pope Paul names laity as Vatican consultants. You see here, Pope Paul VI, Saturday, and I read earlier in this video, Folsom became the first American to be layman to become like a political consultant to the Pope. Pope Paul VI, Saturday. Pope Paul VI was also the Pope that was working with the Office of Strategic Services during World War II to smuggle high-level Nazis and Ustashi war criminals out of Europe into South America, working with the Jesuit-trained Croatian priest Krunoslav Draganovic. That's important information to know, though. But Pope Paul VI, Saturday, named 27 members of the Catholic laity, including one American and one woman, as consultants to the Vatican government in such special fields as law, medicine, art, and broadcasting. One appointee, Professor Francisco Vitos, an economist and former rector of Milan's Catholic University, died at Milan a few hours ago after the announcement was made. Most of the appointments were Italians. Interesting here, among them were 8 members of Rome's, quote, black nobility, end quote. And actually, I know Pope Pius XII, the Pacelli family was known as like one of the black nobility families. But you see, 8 among the members, 8 of them were of Rome's black nobility, who were all fired last week when the Pope abolished the papal court and created in its place a more simple and functional, quote, papal household, end quote. The American appointee was Frank M. Folsom, high-ranking officer of the Radio Corporation of America of New York. He has been serving as the Holy See's observer to the International Atomic Agency based in Vienna, Atomic Energy Agency based in Vienna. Folsom was among 6 foreigners named as honorary consultants. The others were Prince Karl de Lowenstein of West Germany. That's interesting. The next one here was Dr. Maurizio, or Count Vladimir d'Ormesson of France, became a personal political representative to the Pope, or advisor. There's Dr. Mauricio Nabuco of Brazil, Professor Jose Sanchez of Monien of Spain, and Professor Kotaro Tanaka of Japan. 21 Italians living in Rome, including the 8 noblemen, were named as full-time consultants. The, quote, black nobility, and I'm reading from this article on the right, the, quote, the black nobility is composed of noblemen of the former papal states whose families have served the papacy for centuries. The women appointee was Fee Cioloni Lombardi, a member of the Italian Catholic Action Movement, headed up by Knight of Malta Luigi Gedda, Pope Pius XII's medical advisor, who was working for the CIA for over 25 years in Operation Gladio to destabilize Italy and to make sure that the Catholic Church never loses power in Italy. which I can't see it that happening anytime soon. But let me see if there's anything else here on Frank Folsom. Actually, yeah, there's right here. So this was from I found this on Google Books, but this was the autobiography written by Catholic priest Theodore Hesburgh. And interestingly, Theodore Hesburgh, if you're not aware, like there's a photo of him with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was very controlled by the Catholic Church before. Late in his life, he started speaking out against the war in Vietnam, and he started speaking out against like the incredible wealth gap in the United States. Much like Kennedy, like Martin Luther King was kind of like played with the system early to like during his rise, and then started rebelling once he gained, like his following. But he was very close with Catholics. So like you see him holding hands with Theodore Hesburgh. There was a Jesuit priest, Eugene Boyle, that was very close with Martin Luther King. Another priest that was close with Martin Luther King was Joseph Patrick Hurley. Was very close with Martin Luther King. But this is Theodore Hesburgh. He was the president of Notre Dame University. Okay, but here's a picture of Teddy Hesburgh with Folsom. Okay, there he is here. So there's Father Hesburgh. So here's a photo here. This is from 1957. Here's Father Hesburgh on the right and fellow Holy See delegate to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Frank Folsom, report to Pius XII at the Vatican in 1957. There's a photo there. Folsom's wearing his Knight of Malta cross, his Knights of the Holy Sepulchre badge right here. I think there's another photo of Folsom right here. Is this Folsom? Yeah, there's Pope John Paul XXIII with Father Hesburgh and Folsom, again to discuss the annual meeting of the International Atomic Energy. So there's Folsom with Hesburgh and John Paul XXIII. Okay, I'll leave these photos up here for a second. I guess who I think will challenge Trump. I know I have to do more. I have to do more looking into the current U.S. election. I think I got it. Is Zephyr Teachout running? I think this person here this lady could be a dark horse candidate for president sometime in the future because she's a quote progressive who runs with Bernie Sanders, which has lots of like voter appeal, coming off as like a super progressive candidate. But you see, it's even on Wikipedia. She's a professor of law at Fordham University, where Trump went. Yeah, I think Zephyr Teachout would be an interesting candidate. I think Tim Kaine. Although, like, I think even like my parents aren't like. I asked my dad what he thought about Tim Kaine. He doesn't know Tim Kaine went to a Jesuit school, but he's like, "Oh, Tim Kaine, he's so boring." Tim Kaine is boring. People don't like Tim Kaine. He's is a Jesuit tool. He has no relatability to like an average individual. He's plotting to like conquer the world 24/7. Being like he went to the Jesuit Volunteer Corps even. But I could see Tim Kaine possibly running as I could see him being a good candidate. The head of the DNC, Tom Perez, has quote deep Jesuit connections, and Tim Kaine was the governor when the Virginia Tech shooting went down in Virginia. So I could see him running. I could see Hillary honestly running again. I think Hillary. I could see Hillary having one more run at the presidency in her. And I'm just seeing. I'm just seeing you said Hawaii. You mentioned Hawaii, some dude. If you guys aren't aware, there's a big Jesuit connection to the first governor of Hawaii was William Quinn. I gotta see if this guy was connected to Pro Dio. I bet he was. You see, William Quinn, American lawyer, served as 12th and last governor of the territory of Hawaii and the first governor of Hawaii. Okay, but you see here, Quinn went to Jesuit St. Louis University, and he attended prep school at Jesuit St. Louis University Prep. Look at that. So I'm looking into more of this guy. You see here, he was made an Order of the Holy Sepulchre. You see right here. You see he was a devout Catholic. Mentions that on his Wikipedia. That was the first governor of Hawaii. But I think that's all the info on Folsom that I found. Actually, I'll read to you from. I'll show you the photos from Teddy Hesburgh's autobiography. I'll show you them one more time here. There's Folsom, Hesburgh, and John the 23rd. I've also started looking into more of like reading Theodore Greisinger's and Joseph McCabe's books. I've come to realize like John the 23rd was like an anti-pope who existed in like the 1400s, and he was very notorious. Like he was known as like Satan in the flesh. Like that's what the contemporaries, like he was said to have raped over 200 women. That's in like the official Vatican documents. Peter Doiswick quotes that. But like John the 23rd picking the name John 23rd is very sinister if you know how evil and despotic the first John 23rd was from the 1400s. There is the photo there of Folsom, Hesborough, and Pius XII. Let me see here. Those are just. I'm going to read this little excerpt here from Theodore Hesborough's memoirs because Frank Folsom's mentioned. The new pope was Pacelli, of course, because few, if any, of the others were in his league, or at least that is what everyone thought at the time, including me. As time passed, I grew to like him less. During my 3 years of study at Gregorian, the Jesuit school in Rome, I saw him quite a lot. I bet you saw his Jesuit confessor, Augustin Bay, quite a lot too. Continuing, he reminded me of someone pictured on a holy card, hands folded, eyes cast down. He was very formal, stiff, unapproachable, sitting ramrod straight in a chair while receiving visitors. Interestingly, I think accurately, Averman Hatton said that like the Soviet intelligence served, like the NKVD thought that Pius XII was doing like a ton of hallucinogenic drugs late in his life, because like late in his life he was said to have, the Virgin Mary supposedly appeared to him like 3 or 4 times. Jesus appeared to him a few times. Pope Pius XII saw the sun. It was only him. Only he saw it. Only because he's the vicar of Christ, of course. But he saw the sun zigzag for 3 consecutive days straight. No other astronomers in the world mentioned this. No scientists mentioned it. No, even like just casual sun gazer saw the sun zigzag, but the vicar of Christ did, and they made a big deal out of it because like they used it to like stimulate the religious superstition of the Fatima cult that was popping up all over the world. You had the Fatima Congress in Ottawa in 1947, which had over 600,000 Catholics migrate over the world to Ottawa. And in that Congress, according to the Catholic Register, the long red gowns worn by the clergy symbolized their, quote, willingness to shed their blood for the faith, end quote. But yeah, I think just accurately, I think the Soviets were right, though, that Pius was taking a lot of drugs. But continuing here, many years later, when Frank Folsom and I would deliver our report as Vatican representatives on the International Atomic Energy Agency, Frank always had to dress in formal attire. Even for a 9 a.m. appointment, Frank would have to don tails and a white tie. Entering the audience room, he had to go through a whole routine, which included genuflecting 3 times and kissing the ring. Yeah, because being a pope, you have to be. It's a complete, like it's a submissive religion by nature. Like you submit your own free will and liberty to like the will of the clergy and the pope. So you always have to bow down to your superiors. But so interestingly, so Hesborough and Frank Folsom would kiss the ring of the pope. When that silly protocol finally passed into oblivion, he calls it silly. That's funny. I was a happier priest. Frank and I saw Pius XII at least once a year to deliver our report on the International Atomic Energy Association. His close confidant was the governor of the Vatican City, Enrico Galeazzi, a papal count, and a protocol called for Frank and me to submit our report to Count Gazzelli before we presented it to the Pope. So doing this Count Gazzelli would be a good topic for further research looking into him. Count Gazzelli always found something he wanted us to tone down because it might offend the Pope's sensibilities. We would have our meeting with the Pope the next day, but it was always stiff and formal and boring. I cannot help but feel uneasy before him. But actually, interestingly, in the book 14 Years a Jesuit by Count Paul Hoydbrook, there's an interesting quote where he talked about, this is later in his life in the Jesuit order when he was starting to wake up to like the fact that he was in like a very intense cult that had like subdued all of his like inner creativity of his consciousness. But Hoysbrook says that like seeing like Pope Pius IX in person, like he said Pius IX like was overweight, like he was dirty, like he just said like it was just like a mockery, like to say to he was like, it was interesting the way he worded it. He said Hoysbrook said to think that this man is the vicar of Christ is just the greatest insult to all human reason and intelligence. It was an interesting quote. You see here, so continuing from Hesbro, despite my lack of personal feelings for Pius XII, I've always managed to get along with him, which is more than I say for Secretary of State Cardinal Domenico Tardini. During one of our 4 visits to the Vatican, Tardini strongly criticized us for socializing with the Russians on the International Atomic Energy Agency. We both explained that the Pope had given us full power but no instructions, and that we had given ourselves instructions, one of which was charity. We tried to be pleasant and friendly towards everyone. I told Tardini we did not go to Vienna to fight. We went there to help make peace in the world. What a joke. Continuing, since we were representing the Vatican, we felt we should set an example by being a moral force for peace, which the record would show we had been. You see, Folsom's mentioned a few times here. So just continuing, Tardini said you shouldn't even talk to the Russians. Then he said, quote, "They hate us and they would kill us if they could." Folsom chimed in and said that he had just been reading St. Matthew that morning. I knew that it was a little white lie. So interesting. Folsom, no doubt, all high-level Catholics, are liars, because the most authoritative authorities in the Catholic religion all say that it's moral to lie and take an oath of equivocation. All of them. Every single moral authority in Catholic religion says that it's okay to lie and steal and kill non-Catholics. But continuing, Folsom, he quoted St. Matthew to Tardini, quote, "The Lord said, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you." What do you say about that? Folsom asked. Tardini just stood up, stamped his feet, and walked out of the room. That was the last time we ever saw him. The following year, we came to Rome. His assistant was the Secretary of State. I do not think Pius XII was really functioning as Pope during his last few years in office. It's probably his Jesuit confessor that was really controlling things throughout his entire pontificate, that being Augustin J. Continuing, after Pius XII died, there was a rash of articles about the medical treatment he had been receiving. It was really bizarre. His doctor was actually a dentist. That's interesting. John the 23rd was supposed to be an interim pope, or so many people thought, because of his advanced age. When he was elected, he was not expected to live very long or do very much. He certainly fooled everybody. I met him only once. Frank, Folsom, and I were there as usual to deliver our report to the International Atomic Energy Agency. So I think I'll end it there from Hesbro's book. And here's the photos. I just want to see, Folsom isn't mentioned in a lot of sources, but here's photos of him here. Okay. Folsom with Hesbro and Pius XII. There's Folsom, Hesbro, and John the 23rd. So I think I'm going to go back now here just to start covering billions being funneled into South America, because Folsom, you see, this organization Pro-Dio was used as a means to funnel billions of dollars into South America. You see, banker Paul Felix Warburg, for instance, is connected to this board. Okay, Roman Catholic banker T. Murray McDonald connected to the board. Okay, you see here, so this is a letter from John P.E. Brown, which I'm going to show you, like Folsom, was a papal knight connected to this organization. You see your board of directors, John P.E. Brown, second name. You see here, he's sending this to the Secretary General U. Thant of the United Nations. Quote, "Dear Sir, we are glad to learn, although February 28th, 1963, we are glad to learn through Father Felix Morlian of your acceptance," and you see Morlian's on the board here, because it's a mouthful name. The American Council for the International Promotion of Democracy Under God was a CIP, was a front group for Pro-Dio. Okay. You see your Father Felix Morlian we're glad to learn through Father Felix Morlian of your acceptance of our invitation to speak at the first American Abaque meeting being held under the auspices of the American Council for the International Promotion of Democracy Under God, Incorporated, at 6 p.m. on April 1st, 1963 at the Hotel Plaza, New York, New York. This is the 9th Agape sponsored by the International University of Social Studies, Pro-Dio, Rome, Italy. As you will have been advised, His Eminence Agostino Cardinal Bay, S.J., the confessor to both Pius XII and John the 23rd, will make a presentation on the theme, Civic Unity and Freedom Under God. We thank you for your willingness to respond in a 5-minute address to the Cardinal's presentation. We will send you in advance Cardinal Bay's full text. This is John P.E. Brown sending this to the Secretary General of the United Nations. In view of our plan to hold a press conference preceding the meeting, we'll appreciate receiving a copy of your statement when you have had an opportunity to review the Cardinal's address. And you see your Henry Luce, Skull and Bonesman, head of Time magazine, also on the board here, was referenced. J. Peter Grace, Knight of Malta, referenced here, and Paul Felix Warburg is referenced. Okay. And you see here, I'm going to find. So you see his name, John P. E. Brown. I found a little obituary here done quick on New York Times. You see here, John P. E. Brown, executive, 78. He died in 1990. You see here, John P. E. Brown is a retired vice president of the American Arbitration Association, died on Thursday in his home in Manhattan. He was 78 years old. Mr. Brown was born in Corinth, New York, and was a graduate of Ithaca College. He was the executive secretary of the New York Kiwanis Club from 1940 to 1947. When he joined Shenley International, which had its headquarters at the Empire State Building, which was funded by Knights of Malta, John J. Raskob, and Alfred Smith. Okay. But John P. E. Brown joined Shenley International, which had its headquarters in the Empire State Building. As an assistant to the president, he moved to the arbitration group 5 years later to direct its public relations, serving until 1977. John P. E. Brown is a former youth director of the DNC and a former president of the New York City Young Democrats, long active in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York. In retirement, he served as financial consultant to St. Patrick's Cathedral, conducting its annual appeal. He was a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre. He leaves no immediate survivors. You see, these connections to this pro-deal organization are deep. Okay, and you see, this is a real intelligence group. Yeah, these connections go all over the place. We see John P. E. Brown. I just wanted to mention that here. And here's a document I found here. Here's a look. So this is the Secretary General Hugh Thant, who John P. E. Brown just sent a letter to. I just read you. So this guy here, Hugh Thant, wasn't an open Catholic. This guy was completely controlled by the Vatican. Holy cow! Reading some of the letters that this guy sent. So here's Hugh Thant sending this to His Excellency, Most Reverend Agito Vagnosi, the Apostolic Delegate to the Holy See, June 6, 1963. Okay. Look at this. I'll read this from Hugh Thant. I am grateful for your excellencies, that being Agito Vagnosi's communication dated June 22nd, 1963, informing me that His Holiness Pope Paul VI has chosen Sunday the 13th of June as the date of his coronation. It is with great pleasure that I wish to inform your excellency of the appointment of the Mr. Pierre Pascal Spinelli, Undersecretary and General of the European Office of the United Nations, as my personal representative to the coronation of His Holiness Pope Paul VI. Oh, that's cute. Mr. Spinelli will be accompanied by Mr. H. Granville Fletcher, Director of the United Nations Information Center in Rome. So, and you can see document after document that Hugh Thant is sending to Catholic archpriests and bishops in this document. I'll link this in the description because this is a gold mine. I found this just on the UN archives, 240 pages of declassified UN archives of one revealing note after one more revealing note in here. Okay, I'll link that. But here's this what I wanted to show you here, just with the billions being laundered. So you see here, Mr. Grayton Upton. I mentioned earlier in this video, the Inter-American Bank was a bank that was created by the Organization of American States, and a connection that you'll see in the book I referenced earlier in the video called "Thy Will Be Done." Is this guy here? This guy's referenced in the book a decent amount. He was a good friend of Nelson Rockefeller. What was Gal? I'm spelling his name wrong. Give me a second. President of Ecuador in the 1940s. Okay, I'll just have to type this in manually, I guess. Apologize that my spelling's off. So this president of Ecuador was very connected to the Rockefellers, and he went to Georgetown, and this president was a lawyer for the United Fruit Company, and he allowed the Protestant Bible translators, the Summer Institute of Linguistics, into Ecuador, which, Billy Graham was connected to the SLI. The SLI was, very connected with the Roman Catholic hierarchy. Where is this? Okay, I went too far up here. Okay, it was Gallo Plaza. Okay, and my phone just died. I apologize, guys. I won't be able to check the comments. But yeah, this is the guy here. I wanted to show you Gallo Plaza. He was president of Ecuador from 1948 to 1952, and he was the Secretary General of the Organization of American States from 1968 to 1965. This guy became the Secretary General of the OAS 2 years after these documents were sent from Greaton Upton to Moreland, on the topic of billions of dollars being laundered into South America for the indoctrination of the indoctrination of priests to conform to the U.S. system of free enterprise. Okay, and Gallo Plaza, if you read this book here, "Thy Will Be Done: The Conquest of Amazon," Nelson Rockefeller, and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. Plaza was very close with the Rockefellers, and there's more details on how his policies allowed for corporations to take full control in Ecuador. He went to Georgetown University, okay, and he was a lawyer for the United Fruit Company. Okay, very interesting information. He became the Secretary General of the OAS 2 years after these letters were sent. These letters were sent in 1966, and this Inter-American Bank was created by the OAS, the Organization of American States. It all links together. Okay, but I'll just read this letter here from Mr. Greaton Upton, the Executive President of the Inter-American Bank. I went on the annual report of the Inter-American Bank 1966 to see if Greaton Upton's name showed up, and his name shows up under the Vice President section. Okay, so this is sent here from April 6, 1966, from Greaton Upton. Herewith, the second draft improved on the basis of your suggestions. He's sending this to Felix Morlian, sending this to Greaton Upton. Herewith, the second draft improved on the basis of your suggestions. If you think the matter is sufficiently clear, you might send it to Mr. Mann, Mr. Gordon, and Mr. Rostav, all high-ups in Lyndon Johnson's administration. Lyndon Johnson went to Georgetown. Photostats of this so that they can tell you which day they could eventually meet with a few businessmen to conclude the first phase. I repeat. So the businessmen can tell you which day they could eventually meet, or they could tell you they could tell you, that being Mr. Mann, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Rostov, which day eventually they could meet with a few businessmen to conclude the first phase. Mr. Herdman, another assistant, can eventually make some further improvements after phoning me. Before the middle of the next week, I hope to tell you what first payments are made by some of the business leaders approached. As you can imagine, the Rome authorities are waiting for my return at the end of the month to start preparations and practice. Good. This is all declassified. I recommend you guys go through all of these. But I want you to thank you again in the name of my high Roman friends for the inspiration you gave me in the carcass and the help so generously, these days. We will need very much. That you should repeat your speech of the carcass in one of our Rome symposia, possibly in the autumn. Yeah. So this Mr. Greaton Upton at the Inter-American Bank possibly went to Rome to speak at the Caracas in the Vatican. Yeah. And the friend of Nelson Rockefeller, Gal Plaza, became the chairman of the Organization of American States 2 years after this letter was sent. And Nelson Rockefeller, the guy who really catapulted into politics, was the double Jesuit trained Malcolm Wilson at Fordham Prep in Fordham. Malcolm Wilson was Nelson's lieutenant governor and took over Nelson's governorship when Nelson left in 1978. Yeah, but so you see this. This is the next letter I want to show you here. Just look at the headline. I'll read this one. This is a note from the Inter-American Development Bank. You see this? April 11th, 1966. This is the office of the Executive Vice President, Greaton Upton's office. And I mentioned Frank M. Folsom, the billionaire connected to the Radio Corporation of America, Coca-Cola, NBC, General Electric, who I was covering earlier in this video. He was connected to Father Morley's Pro Dio network. Amongst like billionaire Knight of Malta fascist Peter Grace, billionaire Knight of Malta fascist James A. Farley, Henry Luce, C.D. Jackson, Malcolm Wilson, and a whole bunch of others. Okay, but you see here, look at the headline for this note. Father Morlean and the Program of Catholic Church for Indoctrination of a Latin American Priest and Divulgation of Principles of U.S. Free Enterprise System. Okay. So this note is to Walter Rostow, and Rostow was mentioned in the previous document I showed. This is who he is here. He was Order of the British Empire, an American economist who served special assistance of national security to the Jesuit-trained Lyndon Johnson's administration. He went to Yale, it looks like, born in a Jewish family. Probably has some bonesmen at Yale. He was involved in the development of the Marshall Plan, like Cardinal Spellman. Approved the Israeli nuclear program. So Walter Rostow is like a deep state bureaucrat. Yeah, that's why you're seeing his name pop up in these documents. But you see, this is Dear Walt. This is from, let me see who this note's from here just quickly before I read it. Okay, it's from T. Graydon Upton. And you see, T. Graydon Upton was the executive vice president of the Inter-American Bank, okay? This is to Walter Rostow. You will recollect the lunch here at the bank a few weeks ago with Father Morlean. Oh, Father Morlean went to the bank, and he was lunching at the Inter-American Bank. I'll now enclose a description of what he is doing. I personally consider this matter of the utmost importance to U.S. policymakers for Latin America and ask you to give it the most serious study. I first met Father Morlean at a Caracas meeting of the CICYP last year. There he gave a short talk in which he said, in effect, that after years of letting the priesthood in Latin America follow their own ideas with respect to economics and politics, the Pope had decided to make a major effect to indoctrinate them in the concept of the free enterprise system. I repeat, okay, the Pope had decided to make a major effort to indoctrinate them, that being Latin American priests, in the concept of the free enterprise system, and to insist that they take an active role in teaching these concepts. The chief mechanism for this is the International University for Social Studies in Pro Dio in Rome, which I understand must be in the future be attended by any Latin American priest before he rises to a higher level in the Catholic hierarchy. I repeat, this is from T. Grayson Upton, Vice President of Inter-American Bank. Which I understand must in the future be attended by any Latin American priest before he rises to a higher level in the Catholic hierarchy, in addition to the various economic and social directives which will be issued to the Church in Latin America. In the United States, the American Council for the International Promotion of Democracy under God was founded to receive tax-deductible contributions to operate a center of Pan-American studies. I repeat, the American Council for the International Promotion of Democracy under God was founded to receive tax-deductible contributions to operate a center of Pan-American studies, which in turn will pass this material to the International University in Rome, which it will serve as an instruction materials and the basis for church directives to the Church in Latin America. It has an impressive board of directors, and I understand important financial contributions may have already begun to be made. Yeah, and 2 years later, I mentioned earlier, Gal Plaza, the Jesuit-trained former president of Ecuador, became the chairman of the Organization of American States, which the Inter-American Bank is a bank of the Organization of the American States. Continuing here from T. Grayson Upton. In effect, what Father Morlean now wishes is to obtain is the following, quote, a serious review and orientation in this whole effort by the U.S. government. I understand that Ambassador Reinhardt is well informed on the matter. Oh, I bet. Second, the strong moral backing of the U.S. government in a discreet fashion of this effort. In this respect, as a first step, he wants to arrange a lunch with you both and hopefully Lincoln Gordon, I think, who was the secretary of Lincoln. Also, Lincoln Gordon was mentioned in the first document I showed you before this as well. Yeah, Lincoln Gordon, he was the United States ambassador to Brazil, like Joseph Burrell, which I mentioned earlier in this video. Burrell was involved in the coup d'etat in Brazil, and Burrell was a member of Pro Dio. Okay, that's sourced right here. Okay, you see, Adolf Burrell Jr. is connected with Pro Dio. And interestingly, Father Wilfred Parsons, S.J., was one of the Jesuits really close to Joseph Ignatius Breen. And actually, there's a photo of Father Wilfred Parsons, S.J., with Joseph Breen in the book Hollywood Censor, which I have on my library. You see, so Lincoln Gordon was high up in Johnson's administration. You see a lunch in which you both, that being Walter Rostow and hopefully Lincoln Gordon, would be present with many of the U.S. directors as possible, where you would indicate the moral support of the U.S. government for this effort, and funneling billions of dollars for indoctrinating Latin American priests so that U.S. free enterprise can reign unopposed in South America. Continuing, support which would hopefully contribute towards substantial private contributions from U.S. business. 3, an investigation of the possibility of a financial support for this effort by the U.S. government through an appropriate agency. They're trying, so I got to look more into this, because I bet no doubt official government agencies, for example, like if you read in the book Thy Will Be Done, Nelson Rockefeller had a key role in creating the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, the HEW, which was then headed up a few years later by Jesuit-trained Joseph Califano, Knight of Malta. But the Department of HEW was primarily funding the MK Ultra research and the MK Search program. Information in the book Thy Will Be Done on that. Continuing from Grayson Upton, it will be my recommendation that you appoint one of your able assistants to research this whole matter, and I can make available to him documentation which I have at an early date, and make recommendations to you which would hopefully result in positive action on the points mentioned above. For obvious reasons, efforts have been made to give no publicity to the program. I repeat, for obvious reasons, efforts have been made to date to give no publicity to the program, although this might be desirable at a later date. I do not pretend to be thoroughly informed on this matter, and of course it is important in any event that the U.S. government make up its own mind and conduct its own review before taking any policy steps. Nevertheless, it is easy to see the widespread and vital policy implications of such a program for Latin America, and it is also easy to see the importance of it being approached in a way which will take into consideration the various Latin American sensibilities and attitudes, that it not get off on the wrong foot. This will be the role of the Institute of Pan-American Studies. I look forward to receiving reviews on this. Yours sincerely, T. Graydon Upton, Executive President, Inter-American Bank. We see, look at this P.S. I understand that commitments have already been received for contributions from businesses of $250 million, and that Father Morlian expects this to be increased to $1 billion in the next few weeks. To the Honorable Walter Rostow, Special Assistant to the President, Jesuit-trained Lyndon Johnson, the White House. Good. And you can see, I read earlier, like this is Morlian's response here to Grayson Upton from the Inter-American Bank. Okay. You see, this is more. I recommend you go through all these documents here. You see, it's all about implementing, like pacifying the Indians and like giving them like a very watered down version of Christianity. Yeah, I recommend you you read through this whole document though. It's like there's billions of dollars being laundered out of this pro-Dio campaign. You see, it's propaganda materials under this section here. The magazines for distribution in the parishes need a minimum of $200,000 in Portuguese and $400,000 in Spanish. 20 issues each year at an expense of $1.50 annually, times $900,000 a year for pamphlets, plus 6 film sketches with the necessary number of prints, including office facilities, 550,000 in office facilities, which in total 1.45 million. The right dimension needs another 2 million, added to the existing European budget of 990,000. Oh, so we're up to 5 million now on propaganda materials in 1969. Where is this here? Okay, this is on my this is just more reading that you guys should do just on pro-Dio. This is an article I put on my library. It's called The Philosophy of Democracy Under God, C.D. Jackson, Henry Luce, and the Pro-Dio Movement. It was translated from English to French. I just wanted to show you, like, this letter was sent in the 60s. I just want to show you some of this article highlights some of Pro-Dio's movements in the early 1960s. Okay. You see, so this article says, after certain hesitation in 1960 due to Morlian's temporary difficulties with the Vatican, the Italian-American partnership of Pro-Dio is strengthening, this time around Latin America, Or like, look at the headline. Look at this headline here. I'm just going to repeat this headline. It's I thought this was incredible. R.E. Father, this is from Graydon Upton to Walter Rostow. R.E. Father Morley and the Program of Catholic Church for Indoctrination of Latin American Priests and Divulgation of Principles of U.S. Free Enterprise System. That's the headline. Let me see here. So the Italian-American partnership of Pro-Dio is strengthening this time around Latin America, with which Father Morley had contact since the 1930s. After the war, the university opened centers in Lima in 1952, Rio de Janeiro in 1953, Bogota in 1953, and the Dominican Republic in 1956, mainly with funds from local employers, organizations, and then agreements with governments. Pro-Dio is strongly supported by the public and private donations from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and the Dominican Republic, and the Latin American Institute opened in Rome in 1957 with a donation of $635,000 from the Brazilian government. End quote. This is a deep program that was going on here, and that's why. And this is just a good further reading too. Also here, that will be done, knowing that Malcolm Wilson, Nelson Rockefeller's like right-hand man, was Jesuit trained at Fordham Prep in Fordham and was a sitting member on the Pro-Dio American subsidiary, that being the American Council. Let me pull the name here. American Council for the International Promotion of Democracy under God. I think I'm going to end the video there, but I just think if you guys weren't aware, that's just covering just some deep state Catholic connections. And just I'm going to do future videos on this. I really recommend go through the board of directors list at this American Council for an International Promotion of Democracy under God. You can find these documents here in my library. Under here, this page here, another Pro-Dio pamphlet and more declassified documents on Pro-Dio, including letters from Father Morley and to Youth Ant. Here's the source for that. And if you aren't aware, Frank M. Folsom was a very prominent player in papal geopolitics. In his time, he was connected to the Pro-Dio movement as well. Papal Chamberlain, Knight of Malta, and a very prominent industrialist. The permanent representative to the Vatican from the United States, and he was a permanent representative from the Vatican to the International Atomic Energy Commission. And just with atomic energy, just before I go here, I don't want this video to run on too long. I realize it's been a long video. But there's just another interesting connection I found to atomic energy. This guy here, Brian McMahon, was the first chair of the Senate Atomic Energy Committee. And you see here, he's the first chairman of the Senate Atomic Energy Committee. And where did he go? Fordham. Right there. Yeah, but I think that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and namaste.